Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're getting near the end. You guys are going to start recognizing these things more. Man on the left is named Saddam Hussein. This is about Gulf War I. America's very interested in the Middle East, aren't we? We're not interested in Africa the way we are in the Middle East. What has brought our attention here? Don't know what it is?
Oil.
Oil, right. Massive amounts of oil here that we need. About 60-70% of the oil supply of the world back in 1990 is coming out of what is called the Persian Gulf here. Persian Gulf brings together Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, including Bahrain. Very important part of the world. Complicated for us by our support of this country called Israel, which is a Jewish state based on Jewish settlement in the late 1800s, returning under Zionist sentiment. It's complicated our relations with those countries. Now, another thing that complicates the entire thing is there used to be this huge empire called the Ottoman Empire, which controlled all of this region. And after World War I, when the Ottomans were defeated, the British and the French drew these lines, creating Lebanon and Jordan and Syria and Palestine and Iraq. Now, in Iraq, they decided to take three competing groups that hated each other and put them in the same country together, because then you can play them off each other. And that was the British approach to empire. Kurds live in the north, Sunni Arabs in the west, and then Shia Muslims in the east, with an affinity towards Iran. All right, so this is Iraq. Now, Iraq under Saddam Hussein, he is part of a fascist movement called the Ba'ath Party, not democratic, pretty Western though, very secular, cafes, professions, universities, but he is the dictator who will keep control of society. Now, he comes out of the Sunni population, is his background. All right, when Iran becomes the hotbed for Islamic fundamentalism that's anti-Western and wants to create a theocracy. Theocracy means ruled by religious leaders. And Iran's the first one where the Ayatollahs throw off Western ideas and begin to rule under Sharia law, which is old Muslim laws. The Taliban have done this in Afghanistan by now. And now we're moving this direction. Well, Iraq is a bulwark of that for us, and we like Iraq for that. Iraq had been kind of close to the Soviets during the 1970s, but as the Soviet Union's collapsing, and Iran is rising, we're getting closer and closer to Iraq. Now, what sets up the crisis here is Iraq becomes interested in Kuwait. Now, April Gillespie is your ID for this. And all my IDs have a little something to point us along for some big event that's happening. And the big event that's happening is this is April Gillespie on the left. She is the American ambassador to Iraq. In 1990, when Saddam Hussein begins to mass troops on the Kuwait border in the summer of 1990, Saddam Hussein is interested in taking over Kuwait. It's a small state created by the British back in 1919. Now, he accuses Kuwait of drilling horizontally under Iraq lands and pulling out Iraqi oil. So they're cheating, basically. That's what his pretext is for invading them. Now, this picture that we have here of April Gillespie meeting Saddam Hussein is that a conversation takes place between them, and she does not raise the issue of this obvious pretext that the Iraqis are unfolding against Kuwait. We're not troubled by it. We don't really see a big problem with it. Now today, as we see Putin and Russia moving troops up over here across Ukraine and have troops on the border, we're all raising alarms like, don't do it, we'll sanction you. Here's what I want you to know about April Gillespie. The lack of American interest in what Iraq was doing and where they were headed with regard to Kuwait appears to be a green light for Saddam Hussein. Maybe he's being rewarded for being an ally of the United States in the region, is how he's interpreting this. Now, the United States security establishment is now approached by Great Britain. And Great Britain says, you're misreading Saddam Hussein. He is a threat to the entire region. Y'all don't know him well enough. We do. Apparently the British Admiralty, the British Navy, have been doing studies, and they brought to our attention that Saddam Hussein actually has a big plan. He sees himself as restoring an empire based on Baghdad, going back to around 1000 AD when there was a large empire. He plans to take over Jordan and probably parts of Syria and Saudi Arabia and make himself the Grand Emperor. And he would have control of an amazing amount of oil of the world. And we can't let that happen. So towards the last moment, the United States does reverse his signal and says, don't go into Kuwait. Because we are thinking, wow, we didn't realize this was coming. So we tell him not to do it, but he's going to do it anyway. So he invades Kuwait, takes it over in a few days. No problem. Well, now the United States, Great Britain, France go to the United Nations Security Council. And they say this is an illegal activity by one country on another country, and we're going to forcefully eject Iraq out of Kuwait if he doesn't pull his troops out. It's the first time the United Nations Security Council is really working, because the Soviet Union is no longer the Soviet Union by 1990. It's Russia, now under Boris Yeltsin. And China is pretty cozy with us, and they abstain from voting. And so we get this United Nations Security Resolution to forcefully eject him out of there if he does not get out by January 1st, 1991. By the way, James Baker has another role to play here. He's now Secretary of State for George Bush I. And he does something very important. He gets the agreement of the Arab Emirates and the princes of Arabia and the king of Arabia to allow the United States to attack Iraq from Saudi Arabia. Now that's problematic. Saudi Arabia is the homeland for Islam. Mecca is the holy city of Islam. That's where the Prophet Muhammad founded the Islamic religion. Saudi Arabia is very conservative. It's under a king, and the Wahhabi clergy are among the most conservative Islamic leaders in the world. The idea of having infidel, non-Muslim people from the West come and attack another Muslim state was going to be really hard on the people of Saudi Arabia. How can we be working with an infidel against another one? But they also know that Saddam Hussein is a threat to them. They believe that he's a threat to them. The United States is going to protect them. So Norman Schwarzkopf is your next ID, and he is the American general who gets to take on this role that we haven't had since probably the Korean War, where we're going to go and defend another country from an attack. This is our great moment of the Pax Americana. Remember I gave you that phrase the other day, Pax Americana, the peace of America, might for right, King Arthur's Round Table. We're going to stop aggression. Here's the battle plan. We're going to stage an operation. Down here it'll be U.S. troops, British troops, French troops, Canadians, Poles. It's an international coalition. We're going to attack Saddam Hussein's troops in Kuwait, but we're also going to come through and devastate his Imperial Guard. And we do so. We start with bombing Baghdad, knocking out his command and control center, their electricity, dropping their bridges. And by the way, we were all watching this on CNN back in 1991, and we're all going, yeah, American power's back, right? We got driven out of Vietnam, but look who's back, baby. And we feel pretty nationalistic about all this. Saddam Hussein launches Scud attacks on Israel. He tries to make this about a Western power invading a Muslim country, and it's all about this Zionistic movement. So because he knows that appeals to the average Arab on the street, who he wants to present himself as the protector of, which would partially give him some political points in going after Saudi Arabia. All right, well, we devastate the Iraqi army in a number of days. Our new military does fantastic. We got mobile rocket launchers that can decimate whole sections of army. We've got Abrams tanks that can see through sand berms and fire depleted uranium rounds into other tanks and turn them into blenders on the inside, devastating the whole crew. And then our air power is complete. We crush it. And it's a great moment for the United States. And the idea of the Pax Americana, that the international community is finally functioning maybe like the way that Franklin Roosevelt thought it might function. All right, now Schwarzkopf, next part of this ID, is that he enters into negotiations with Saddam Hussein. The UN resolution said that the resolution only authorized us to expel Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. Didn't give us the right to remove him from power in Iraq. And I think that's all we wanted to do, was to remove him from Kuwait. Because if we remove him from Iraq, then Iraq, given its different groups, like the Shia in the southeast and the Sunni over here and the Kurds up there, well, Iraq might come apart. And that would let Iran probably move in here with the Shia and be that much closer to Hezbollah in Lebanon and increase the likelihood. It's like either we're going to have a dominant Sunni state that threatens international oil, or we're going to have an Iranian greater control through Syria and Lebanon, creating problems. We wanted to keep Iraq where it was as a buffer to Iran. So we left Saddam Hussein in power. All we require of him is, a couple things. We want him to give more independence to the Kurds in the north. He's got to stop gassing them, for one thing. And he's got to leave the Shia down here alone too, because they had thought about breaking off. But WMD is an ID down for you at the bottom. It says weapons of mass destruction. It says Colin Powell next to that. But I need to give you the background on it now. Saddam Hussein had used weapons of mass destruction against Iran and against his own people. He used sarin gas, some other nasty things, and we tell him he's got to get rid of that. And he's got to be willing for international inspectors to come in and make sure that he has turned it all over. And Saddam Hussein agrees to this. Now what happens is he leaves Kuwait, but he is one angry person. And he is very bitter at the United States. He challenges us repeatedly. He will not cooperate with the weapons of mass destruction investigations. The 2 no-fly zone areas we have, he has his radars lock onto our planes. Therefore, we have to take out his radar and his surface-to-air missiles. He's constantly probing us and defying us in his anger. And he begins to help export terrorism to Israel by backing Palestinian suicide bombers. He begins to provide them with suicide vests and things like that. And he continues to threaten Saudi Arabia, because he's now talking about how Saudi Arabia is a pawn of the West and how they're not really true to Islam. All right, interstage left a group called Al-Qaeda, right? They're on your list, and I need to go ahead and tell you about them now. There is this movement in this part of the world that says anti-Western, anti-globalization, restoration of Muslim fundamental ideals. Al-Qaeda is a group in Saudi Arabia that wants to get rid of the House of Saud, the House of Saud being the royal family that oversees Saudi Arabia. It claims that they are a pawn of the West. These guys aren't real Wahhabi Muslims. They spend half their time in Morocco spending $20,000 a night for a hotel, and have harems and conduct themselves in the ways that Muslims should. And most of the Muslim population of Saudi Arabia is very poor, and these princes get all the oil. The leader of that group is a man named Osama bin Laden. And he is the architect of this Al-Qaeda group. He comes from wealth, but he has denounced his wealth and taken on the style of a religious leader, mujahideen, somebody who is going to fight in the name of Islam, even if it means fighting against Muslim leaders who are not true to Islam, like the House of Saud, he claims. Now here's the problem. With Saddam Hussein being bitter about this war, and speaking against Saudi Arabia, the United States has to keep troops in Saudi Arabia. And that's going to further the political message that Al-Qaeda can put against the House of Saud, that it's just a puppet of the United States. And so Al-Qaeda, one of the first things they do is they bomb American barracks in Saudi Arabia. This creates a lot of tension. We'd like to find out who did it. We'd like to send the FBI in and do an investigation, and Saudi Arabia says, we can't have any more American presence in our country because it's feeding the Al-Qaeda movement that wants to overthrow us. We need American troops out. But we've also got this problem of Saddam Hussein continuing on there. So we isolate our troops to bases, and we start trying to figure out how we can get out of out of Saudi Arabia. But the continued irritation of Saddam Hussein against us makes it all problematic. And throughout the next 12 years, Saddam Hussein is constantly trying to poke us in the eye, and it just gets to be a real mess for us. The Madrid Conference is the last cool effort on the part of James Baker. By the way, all the things I was talking about Al-Qaeda, we don't yet know that's unfolding. In 1991, we have a conference in Madrid, which is in Spain, organized by the United States. The purpose of the Madrid Conference is to bring peace to Palestine. Well, peace to Israel, by creating a solution to the Palestinian refugee problem. You all will remember earlier this semester when I talked about the birth of Israel, that all these Palestinian indigenous population ran away from the Israeli army and were living in refugee camps. Israel occupies what's called the West Bank of the Jordan River in 1967, and you've got, again, all these refugees. So the purpose of the Madrid Conference is the United States saying, we've got to get together the whole, Western allies and say, we got to get a solution. And so, interestingly, I'd like you to know this. Israel's not very interested in a creation of a Palestine state, because the Palestinians, many of them are saying, we want our farms back, we want our land back. And George Bush Sr. is the first president who puts a lot of pressure on Israel. He says, we give you guys about $1 billion a year in aid. You're the 51st state. There's no tariffs on anything you want to sell in the United States. And we've gone to bat for y'all, and we've got bad relations with the Middle Eastern Middle Eastern countries that we rely on for oil. So we're really taking a real whack here to protect you guys, and it's time for you guys to step up and do something. I'm going to cut off aid if you guys don't start negotiations. So from 1991 to 2014, right, till today, we're still struggling to come up with a solution to this. But we do get ourselves some good talk on the street. At least America is starting to try to put some pressure on Israel for this purpose. By the way, that's the last time that Mikhail Gorbachev is pictured. Actually, Boris Yeltsin is on the way up, and the Communist Party is on the way out. He looks a little sick at his stomach there. His country is falling apart while he's at Madrid. All right. So 1991-92 looks like this great time of American leadership in the world for creating stability. But stability is about to be undermined. And Alan's shaking his head yes. Now we have a surprise outcome in 1992, and your ID for this is Ross Perot. George Bush Sr. had among the highest approval rates of all time for a president. It was way up there. By the time the summer of 1991, late 91, he appears to be unassailable. He's going to get reelected in 92. They just can't imagine him not being reelected. But then something happens. A couple things correspond. Number one, we have a recession in our economy in late 91, early 92. And we've got unemployment ticking up. Number two, the American press evidently take off their gloves against George Bush, and they start criticizing him. And I have seen some journalists talk about this, and there does seem to be some indication that every 4 years is a big cycle for news for presidential candidates, and they wondered how much interest there would be in this presidential election, because no big Democrats would come out against him. It was really quite a poor array of people against George Bush who were saying they were going to run. And he starts getting picked at. And I remember a Time magazine cover in about May 1992 when it has George Bush looking like this disconjointed doll, and he didn't know what he was doing. And so I think the editorial staff at some of these magazines starts saying, let's take a whack at the president and see what happens. All right, the only one who is really credible in the Democratic camp is this young governor from Arkansas. His name is Bill Clinton. Now, he's just doing the 1992 election as a rehearsal for 96, because he doesn't think George Bush can be beat, but he can introduce himself to the country. And then a wild card gets played, and the wild card is Ross Perot. He's a billionaire from Texas, so as far as your ID goes, Ross Perot is a billionaire from Texas who decides, with this monstrous ego that this guy has, and the money he's got, he's going to run for president of the United States as an independent. He's got enough money and enough people who like him, and he's funny. And the way he speaks is pretty cool. He's a much better speaker than George Bush is. George Bush wasn't a very good speaker. Bill Clinton was. But Ross Perot comes in and he mostly attacks George Bush. And he siphons off a whole bunch of independent voters in the middle. I'm sorry to say, myself included now. Alan's even, did you do it too, Alan? You did it too. He got us. Ross Perot got us. We love the way he talked. We love this idea of an independent middle person running. And he siphoned off enough votes from George Bush that Bill Clinton wins the election. And here Bush was unassailable coming out of all the successes he's had. And now this young man from Arkansas comes to the White House. And he wasn't ready for prime time. I can tell you that. Bill Clinton wasn't. He had a lot of things to get in order back in Arkansas that he didn't have a chance to get in order before he came to. He had a lot of skeletons in his closet. Or maybe blow up dolls in his closet. It would be a better reference that he needed to put to bed. All right, one of the very first things that he does, Bill Clinton gets off to a real bad start, and his popularity rate plummets by 1994. And one of the things I bring here is I just remember at the time, he's very connected to Hollywood, and he likes the stardom. He likes being in the know. He likes being socially prominent. When he's in California seeing some of his fundraisers, he's about to leave and someone says, you've got to get, I can't remember the name of the person's, Christoph. You've got to get Christoph to do your hair. And so his friends just want him to have this great hairstylist. I don't know, probably $200 haircut, maybe $500 haircut. For this guy Christoph to come and give him a haircut on Air Force One. And so LAX gets shut down for about 2 hours while the president gets his haircut in Hollywood. And even the press starts going, they start saying, what's going on with this guy? I mean, how serious is he? And I just wanted to let you know this bumbling that Bill Clinton does. He's pretty respected now. And a lot of Republicans say, wow, we wish we could go back to the time of Bill Clinton, because Bill Clinton dramatically reduces the welfare state in America, which is he's going to do almost everything the Republicans want eventually. Some people called this Hairgate at the time. Now, what I'd like you to know is Bill Clinton is going to be, on economics, he's going to be conservative. He's going to be willing to cut taxes to some degree and to free up regulations and to roll back welfare. That's going to bother a lot of people on the left. So he's going to have to be culturally liberal. And some of the ways he's culturally liberal is to favor feminist issues, favor health care, favor gays being able to serve openly in the military. And that will get him some points on the left, but it'll make cultural conservatives see him as a horribly hedonistic person. Now, I guess I want to give you GATT now. GATT I've given you before, but under Bill Clinton, we go into another round of trade talks. General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs first started in 1948. We do this new round of negotiations, and the United States agrees to reduce tariffs on these products by these percentages. Look at the number 1 percentage. Wood, pulp, furniture, and paper. We're willing to reduce our tariffs by 69%. Tariffs are things that are going to be taxes on imported products into the United States. Metals, 62%. So you can say furniture industry, steel industry, electric machinery, 47% reduction. Chemicals, transportation equipment, but the big ones are up here. Now, the combination of the reduction of tariffs plus the arrival of the new big transatlantic, transpacific cargo ships. Can y'all see how big those things are? These things are holding, I don't know, maybe 500 of these big cargo containers, which once they get to San Diego, can then be brought up and put on the back of a train, doubled up, brought across America, and then put on 18-wheelers, and then brought to distribution points. This system of transportation greatly reduces, in these big bulk containers, we can now move big products across the ocean very cheaply. And what that does is it kills our furniture industry in the United States. Hickory, North Carolina, Lenore, Carolina, Brookline here in Morristown. American companies move their production facilities to China. We take our machines there. At first we thought that would never, who in the world would imagine that you could compete effectively against United States Furniture, since the hardwood comes from here and these things are big. And the finishing that we can do is better than almost anybody in the world. Well, we just take our finishers over there and we teach the Chinese workers how to do it. But these are American-owned companies. But Bill Clinton gets behind this. This is an interesting thing about Bill Clinton. He's a neoconservative Democrat who doesn't mind wealth creation. I have a picture up here. These people, they say, we want our jobs back. They don't like NAFTA under George Bush, and now Bill Clinton's been just as bad by reducing tariffs. Now, the long-term historical view of this is mixed. A lot of people lose their jobs in America, and they'll have to find other kinds of jobs, and they won't have as much security because they're not working for factories with union contracts. They are paying lower wages, and they are, having to be retrained. They're going to technical schools and learning to work on copy machines, and they're going around and being copy machine repair people. It's that kind of service jobs that we begin to move into. At the same time, we're also getting products much more cheaply in America. And so I guess you could say our affluence by most Americans with clothing and lots of machinery and electronics, they're much more affordable, but the people that make most of the wealth are the companies and the company leadership and owners of companies that make money off all this. But the standard of living, I suppose, and what we have goes up. All right, so there's that. Now your next one is the Healthcare Reform Act. Do I have that on? Hillary Clinton. Let's go with Hillary Clinton here. I guess you guys are looking for an idea, aren't you? Hillary Clinton is the President, Bill Clinton's wife. We've had prominent first ladies before. Eleanor Roosevelt was probably the first prominent first lady who spoke a lot and was followed by the public. Lady Bird Johnson, Lady Bird Johnson would be the next one, who's pretty outspoken. Rosalind Carter was, but now nobody's been like Hillary Clinton. She was apparently politically motivated. She is interested in public policy, potentially in public office. Bill Clinton decides that he's going to try to provide health care for Americans. And he tasks his wife with coming up with a plan. That's what I want you to know about Hillary Clinton. She takes over what is called the Healthcare Reform Act. The problem is she does this in a way that irritates a lot of Americans, including a fair number of Democrats. She gets together, by the way, her background, she's from Little Rock, Arkansas. Her father was a lawyer. She became a lawyer, and she's a very powerful lawyer. She gets together a think tank, and they come up with a bill that's going to create what is called a single-payer system. The government taxes, Americans for health care, kind of like Medicaid. And then it turns around and pays the providers. And it will be negotiating better costs because the payments will be coming in bulk. Well, when they're ready to do this thing in 1994, they bring the bill already finished to Congress. So Congress is going to receive a bill that the president's wife and her team of people who they won't allow to come in and negotiate this thing. It's like, here it is, we want you to pass this. And a bunch of Democrats also get pretty annoyed at this. And now interstage left this guy named Newt Gingrich. Right here, you guys might know his name. He was even in the last presidential election, wasn't he? Newt Gingrich from Georgia, political scientist and college professor before he went into politics, is in Congress. And he has become, he's a very outspoken critic of the president's administration. And he gets together something which he calls a contract with America. He says that the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, is much too liberal for America. His cultural programs like gays in the military, his Health Care Act is like socialism, and Newt Gingrich wants to free up the American states for a lot more independence from the federal government. He starts talking about, we've got these national impositions on us, like how fast we can drive on our highways. Does anybody remember when the maximum speed in America was 50? Y'all wouldn't. It was 55 miles an hour in America. That was the top rate you could go anywhere in America. And it was imposed by Washington. And he says we need to throw off all these things and reduce the power of the federal government. Now, American people overwhelmingly decide to go with the Republicans against Bill Clinton in the 1994 election. This is the congressional elections of 1994. All the red are Republicans. And so the Republicans sweep the House of Representatives almost. And now the president's lost Congress to Republicans, and he loses the Senate to Republicans. And now they're after him. And they get something on him, and it's called the Whitewater scandal. Your ID here is Kenneth Starr. This is Kenneth Starr right here. Evidence is beginning to emerge by some journalists about a problem back in Arkansas. And I didn't mention this to you guys, but in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a meltdown in our savings and loan sector of the financial system. And lots of savings and loans in America went bankrupt. And the American government had to step in and prop them back up. Well, the way this all comes together is back in Arkansas, Bill Clinton had a friend, the McDougalls, who were wanting to open up a real estate development thing in Arkansas. And he had a little savings and loan that was going to provide the funding for this real estate transaction. He both owned the savings and loan and he owned the property. And Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton were close to them, and they were a big campaign contributor to the Clintons. They were one of a number of people who were helping out. Well, the McDougalls got into trouble, and their savings and loan went under, and it appears that Bill Clinton helped do some political favors for him that cost the taxpayers, federal taxpayers and Arkansas, money. But then an investigation of McDougal's, he seems to try to stop an investigation against them because maybe it might expose how close he was to them and maybe the things he did. Well, what this Time magazine is showing is the chief of staff, Stephanopoulos, with Bill Clinton. And it says, how the president's men tried to hinder the Whitewater investigation. Whitewater was the name of the real estate program they were working on. Congress smells blood. And they remember the investigation of Nixon. And they want a special prosecutor to be brought in to investigate what the president knew and whether or not he used his office as President of the United States to hinder the investigation of the McDougalls. And so Congress appoints Ken Starr, a judge from Houston, Texas, I do believe. Got a lot of Texas connections, right? We've had for a while now. Who starts looking at the president's actions. And this is when things get crazy. He's got an unlimited fund to start investigating the president, and he gets the right to do wiretaps on various people. Here's what I want you to know about Ken Starr. By the way, we find out today, we know later he's pretty hardcore Republican. He wasn't truly independent. But he starts investigating the president, and he can find no evidence, not enough evidence against the president to show wrongdoing. But in the midst of his wiretaps, I need to tell you someone else's name. Her name is Paula Jones. Did you know the name Paula Jones? Have y'all heard raise your hand if you heard the name Paula Jones. Y'all don't know Paula Jones. Paula Jones was a state worker in Little Rock, Arkansas. And turns out that Bill Clinton was a big womanizer. And he would have state troopers. If his eyes fell on somebody, he's like, I guess like King David, right? He's like, I'd like to meet that young lady. Can you bring her over? And so his eyes have fallen upon Paula Jones, this worker who he likes the way she dresses and how she looks. He wants to know if she wants to have a meeting. So state troopers come up to her and say, the governor wants to meet you. And he's like, well, how nice. He's like, he'd like to meet you at this hotel and have a conversation with you. And so she meets. Now she's thinking, I don't know what she was thinking, why he would be interested in her. Maybe because he's heard that she's a really good worker. She meets him and he makes advances on her and he flees. She flees the hotel. And she then starts a civil suit against him, claiming sexual harassment, right about the time that he goes to Washington, D.C. as President of the United States. Now, she wants to depose him as the president for what happened. Deposing means she wants her lawyers to go in and talk to him and ask him what happened in that room. All right, so now enter stage left, Monica Lewinsky. You all know that name? Yeah. All right, this is going to clarify this all for you. Monica Lewinsky is an aide in the White House. She's a White House intern. And Bill Clinton's eyes have fallen upon young Miss Lewinsky as well. But that's not what gets it. Monica Lewinsky has made a friend on someone in the White House staff, and I can't remember her name. She's from Arkansas. And they start having telephone conversations at night, and Monica wants to know, does he really like me? I mean, we're doing this stuff. Does he really like me? And they're having these conversations back and forth. Well, the phone line is tapped by Kenneth Starr because the woman knows the McDougalls. This is like a Shakespeare, story. And so Kenneth Starr's wiretaps are revealing these conversations about Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton. Now, go back to Paula Jones. Paula Jones wants to depose the President of the United States. And her team of lawyers has to argue but Bill Clinton says, I can't be deposed for a civil suit while I'm sitting President of the United States. That seems like a bad idea. And so in Jones versus Clinton in 1995, the Supreme Court in a 5-4, no, I think it was 9-0. I think it was 9-0, says that a sitting president can be deposed in a civil suit while he's President of the United States. Today we think it was a horrible idea. Now, in this deposition, a surprise question comes to Bill Clinton. And they're wanting to show a pattern of his abuse of women that he becomes interested in. And they start asking about an intern in the White House. Monica Lewinsky, I think, was a complete surprise to him. It appears that Starr's team leaked to Jones's team that the president was having a liaison with this young intern. And so in the deposition, the president's asked about the relationship, and he denies a sexual relationship between them. He denies it, which is a lie, and he's under oath for a deposition. All right. The Kenneth Starr investigation wraps up, and he comes to Congress with the information about what he has found. He points to shady activity with Whitewater, but what his whole investigation comes down to in his presentation is that he's got evidence of the President of the United States lying under oath, which may be an impeachable offense. Because is that a high crime and misdemeanor for a president to lie before having held up his hand and say, I promise to tell the truth? Well, the Republicans are smelling blood and they want to get rid of this guy, and so they decide to impeach him. And we have an impeachment trial of the President of the United States. And the House of Representatives under Gingrich passes articles of impeachment, and they kick it up to the Senate. And everybody in the world finds out about Monica Lewinsky and some less than savory aspects of their relationship. And of course, Saturday Night Live has a lot of fun with it. It goes to the Senate, and the Senate overwhelmingly says no. We're not going to remove a president of the United States for lying under oath about sex in a civil deposition. And Clinton goes on, greatly chagrined, embarrassed. Who knows what happened to the poor man in the White House with Hillary? I mean, she probably had a couple rounds with him upstairs. So they're probably still stains up there, or holes in the walls in the White House from what he did. Now, Bill Clinton is willing to do whatever the Republicans want at this point in time. He passes. And the most important one I want you to know is that in 1996, when he's being reelected, he proclaims that the end to big government, the end to welfare as we know it, oh my word, he's become as big of a Republican as Republicans are on economic issues. They put a mandatory maximum number of months that you can be on welfare. And the most important thing for us is that they passed the Financial Services Modernization Act of 1999. Now this picture, it's called the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, tearing down the walls between insurance, banking, and investing. Tearing the walls down between insurance companies, banking, and investment companies. Here's what I want you to know. It deregulates the financial industries of America. Deregulates them. Very importantly also, ladies and gentlemen, it overturns Glass-Steagall Act. Y'all remember Glass-Steagall from 1932, actually 1933, when they were looking at the collapse of Wall Street, and they decided they needed a firewall between investment banking and commercial banking? Here's what I want you to know. Between 2000 and 2008, we're going to have the run-up in American banking. American bank are going to be deregulated, and they're going to do all kinds of risky transactions. They're going to use an instrument called mortgage-backed securities to write credit like crazy. There's going to be all kinds of loans that are put out to the American public. Wall Street just starts writing and writing, and we're going to have a boom in America based on real estate values and housing values. And the value of houses starts to inflate. A house that was $50,000 is $75,000 the next year. But in the bigger areas like Florida and along the coast, an apartment that you bought for, a townhouse you bought for $225,000 as a vacation house, by 2002 is worth $1 million. And yes, and you begin to ask, I don't know if y'all know this yet, but you're supposed to have an independent person do an evaluation of a house. And they give that, you take that to the bank when the bank is going to write a loan for this. Well, everybody gets into cahoots. The people that are writing these values, they look at what other houses are selling for. And the other houses in the area are increasing in value. And bankers go along with it. And they just start writing these bigger and bigger loans. And these banks are making money off of it too. But here's what I want you to know. It sets up a bubble that's going to collapse in 2008, bringing down the financial sector and causing a deep recession in the United States, which will result in the loss of 6 million jobs, blowing a hole in the federal budget because tax revenue is going to be off by about 30%. And on top of that, in the very same time, we're fighting 2 wars that cost over $1 trillion and have ongoing costs related to them. So that's the impact of those right there. I think I'm going to add for this one Janet Reno. It's a couple of more things you need to know about just in the history of the United States that I want to make sure you know going out of here. This guy right here is a man named David Koresh. And he decides that God has spoken to him, and he's a prophet. And he's a son of God. And he convinces some people in Waco, Texas. I was living near him at the time. I was going to Baylor University and never met him. But he forms a compound of religious devotees who live with him. Now, it turns out that he's like a lot of these other, I say a lot. He's like some other people who have used religion upon people who are a little lost in their life and convinces them that he is this prophet. So much so that he is sleeping with the wives of the devotees who are with him, right? He's like the man there, and these other men who are seeing him as their religious leader are letting him sleep with their wives and their daughters. Now, he is convinced that this is an end-day scenario. He's I'm reminded here a little bit of the movement out in the late 60s with Charles Manson. Again, you can have extremists from all areas. But he starts stockpiling weapons. And there's a movement in America in the late 1990s that is encouraged by the anti-federal government sentiment that the Republicans have been talking about. Bad federal government, bad federal government. And so we have these militia movements that begin to see the federal government as a dangerous thing that wants to come into their lives. And there's also an assault gun ban in America in the 1980s after the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan. The people in charge of going after assault weapons are the FBI's Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Unit. And they have found out that this weird compound down here is buying machine guns and other weapons that they're not supposed to have. And so they try to serve a warrant to search the premises in, what would that be, 1999. And the agents who try to serve the papers get shot. One of them gets killed. And so now the FBI swarms on this group. And a big standoff takes place. And Janet Reno is the attorney. Saturday Night Live just did horrible things with her on their parodies. But she is the Attorney General who's in charge of the FBI and who authorizes an invasion of the compound. And here's a date I want to give you guys. April 19th. That happens to be the day that the British tried to take Lexington and Concord, and that's the Militia Day movement. That's the Patriots' Day. In the course of this assault on April 19th, the entire compound goes up in flames. Probably started by a fire on the inside. I think Koresh decided to take the whole group with him. But for this young man in Montana, this was all evidence of the federal government coming down on us. And he is, within a few years, is going to roll into Oklahoma City and decide to fight back at the federal government and blow up the F. Morrow building in Oklahoma City. And the truck he parked was right under a daycare unit. And this is a Social Security office, it's a federal building, killing all these kids. And all of a sudden we've got this militia movement in America that's getting really ticked up. And we decided to back off of it. I would say this about Janet Reno, probably pushed the militia movement a little far. But it's out there, and I wanted you guys to know about this background. And so we had domestic terrorists. Look at the date he's using, April 19th. Because he wants to strike back. He believes that the federal government is, I don't know, worse than the communists or badass. Several things here about Bill Clinton's foreign policy. He has a pretty successful foreign policy during his administration. One thing is definitely out of his control, and he does, I think, his best with it. He takes over from the Madrid conference, which is pictured here with George Bush and Baker, and there was this effort to bring peace to the Middle East. I want to remind you that our support of Israel has cost us some real enemies in the Arab Muslim world. And our support from them is giving us a whack, right? We've got a bunch of people that hate us because of it. And Bush puts pressure on Israel to do something for the Palestinians. And he threatens to cut aid to Israel. He gets the Madrid conference, which sets up the Oslo Accords. In Oslo, Norway, Palestinian representatives and Israeli representatives meet and agree to a roadmap that will hopefully lead to what is called a two-state solution, which there will be actually an independent Palestinian state. Now, and it's an independent Palestinian state within, so will be Israel, and then the Palestinians will have their own state. Now, under Clinton, after Oslo, he's able to bring the Prime Minister of Israel and the Palestinian leader, Yasser Arafat, to Washington, kind of a Camp David 2. Camp David 1 got Israel and Egypt together under Carter, and now Clinton is trying to bring together Israel and now this Palestinian state. What happens, however, is that on both sides, there are groups that don't want to have peace between the countries. You've got Palestinians who want more of their land back, and you've got Israelis who, when the Prime Minister agrees to evacuate the West Bank and move Jewish settlers out of the West Bank. Jewish settlers had been moving in there and building housing units. That leads to the assassination of the Israeli Prime Minister by, I would say, a fundamentalist Jewish nationalist who believes that his agreement to remove Jewish settlements from the West Bank was against God's word, and that they had the right to assassinate him. The next Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, ends up backing off on some of these accords. Also, I don't know how directly Yasser Arafat was involved in unleashing this, but many Palestinians begin to blow themselves up on Israeli buses, in cafes in Tel Aviv, and this leads to the Israelis having to crack down on Yasser Arafat. And that's his compound where he is almost killed right there. But then he does end up dying. Palestinians think that he was poisoned, but he ends up dying. And so we end up having this hopeful episode in bringing peace to the Middle East collapse by 1999. And we're still working on it 15 years later. John Kerry, after about 12 months of pushing again, he just now gave up last weekend because he cannot bring the two sides to an ultimate settlement. So again, this problem continues. Now, let me give you a foreign policy success, and that's the work of Wesley Clark. This has to do with the United States intervening in the world with our military might to protect civilians. This is a might for right moment. This is King Arthur's Round Table, riding out and saving people. Now here's your background. Yugoslavia, across from Italy, was put together at the end of World War I, and it took a bunch of different nationalities, Slovenians, Croatians, Bosnians, Herzegovinians, Serbs, Croats, Macedonians, and put them all in one country. And they're all different ethnic groups, and they all have different religions. They all live under Yugoslavia, which was dominated by the Serbs, who were Greek Orthodox Church. In 1992-93, you have Croatia trying to break out and have their own country, and Bosnia, Herzegovina, Slovenia, Macedonia, and the Serbs don't want to let them go, or if they go, they want to grab a lot of their land. And so a civil war breaks out in Yugoslavia. Slobodan Milosevic, the head of Serbia, has a lot more power and military, and he begins to unleash on the civilian populations, committing genocide, having terror camps where he is brutalizing civilians, and in Sarajevo especially, we're watching on national news as in this predominantly Bosnian Muslim city, very secular, I'll say that though about Muslims there, we're having these Serbian snipers shoot down people in the streets. I remember seeing this one report of this man and his father. They've gone to get food, a young boy and his father, and they're running back, and the man gets shot, and the kid's trying to get his dad up, and we see him die on TV. And so it brings the irritation of the world to what's happening there. And the United States, under Bill Clinton, decides we're going to intervene. And NATO, remember NATO, but formed in 1949 as a bulwark against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union has collapsed by now. We're not sure what it's going to do. And so this is our first effort under United States leadership to use might for right, Pax Americana, that I described to you guys before, like the peace of America. And so the United Nations, with the U.S. asking for it, determines to intervene in Kosovo, which is a province up here. And we use American military, it's mostly airstrikes, to knock out Milosevic's capability. And finally, Milosevic backs off. So what I want you to see there is this is a big victory where America gets thumbs up for intervening to stop evil in the world. Wesley Clark is the general in charge of the U.S. operations. Now, as we look at the period, a great failure, which I don't have a slide for, is the Rwandan crisis of 1994, when ethnic conflict breaks out in Africa, in the country of Rwanda, which had formerly been a French province and part of the Belgian province too. And we failed to intercede there, and we can't stop it. And 800,000 civilians get killed by other civilians. Tutsis and Hutus kill each other in great number. It's a horrific thing, and Africa complains about, and other parts of the world complain, you only care about Europe and you don't care about people that don't have money, and so there's that. George Mitchell is your next ID. He's a senator from Georgia who Bill Clinton tasks with a special project. He's going to help bring peace to Ireland. This is again one of these things where we're trying to solve festering wounds. It just won't go away. Now, y'all don't know much about it, but Ireland was a place of upheaval. The Irish got dominated by the English back in the 1600s. They moved a lot of Protestants in to control the area. The Irish go up into rebellion in 1916, 1917. Finally, Britain backs off, lets Ireland emerge, but they hold on to Northern Ireland, where a lot of Protestants were. From 1920 to 1993, maybe 94. Northern Ireland is a place of conflict. The Catholic Irish population there continues to be very poor, unable to hold up public office. The security forces in Northern Ireland are on the side of the Protestants. This is a picture of a crackdown on average people by security forces in North Ireland. And what forms in Northern Ireland is something called the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, a militia group that is attacking Protestants. Now, here's the way the United States gets into it. We have got a lot of Irish in America, as you guys may remember, going back to the 1830s. Well, up in New England and Boston and places, you've got Irish people hearing about an orphanage in North Ireland, or maybe in regular Ireland. Send money to help the orphanage. Well, a lot of these things are fronts for money to flow into the Irish Republican Army. And that's why Bill Clinton believes that we've got to get involved here, because we've got a lot of Americans who are back in the IRA. We're fairly friendly with the English, and can't we solve this thing? So George Mitchell, using good American graces, negotiates with both sides, the IRA and the English Protestants. And he gets, on Good Friday, I believe in 1993, a decision by the part of the IRA to disarm and social freedoms for the Irish, and a peace agreement comes forward. Now that peace agreement has held well since then, unlike the Israeli one. The leader of the Irish Sinn Féin, which was the political wing of the North Ireland, this guy right here, Gerry Adams, very ironically, just 2 days ago, he got arrested in North Ireland for possible execution of an Irish woman in 1972 who was thought to be an informant for the Protestant forces. So it's interesting. We're hoping this thing doesn't flare up again, but it was it may flare up. And what I'm really doing today is trying to make sure you guys understand the world you're in. So that if you hear about bombings in Dublin and craziness in Dublin, you'll know what the background was. Okay, that's the end of Bill Clinton's administration. By the way, his low point in approval ratings was in 1993 when he had 37% of Americans approved of the job he was doing. That's about one of the poorest records. But before he leaves office, he's up to 71% high. So not quite right when he leaves, but by the 97 period, 98, he is really quite well thought of in America because America's booming economically. He's done the Financial Modernization Act, which lets Wall Street do whatever it wants with exotic financial instruments. And now we have a very contested election in 2000 between Bill Clinton's vice president, the former senator from Tennessee, Al Gore, versus George Bush's son, George Bush II, George Herbert Walker Bush, W, as they call him. I think that now George Bush had been a businessman in Texas. He had gotten into oil like his father. He became owner of the Texas Rangers, and he was governor of Texas in the 90s. I think he was really irritated at Bill Clinton for winning the 1992 election and feels his father should have had a second term. And that may have been part of the motivation. There's some other things as well. But at any rate, he runs for office, and it is an extremely close election. It all comes down to one state. Who's going to get the electoral votes of Florida? Now, at first, it looked like Bush won, but then they were saying there were some problems with some ballots not being counted properly in Dade County in Miami, and they had to do a recount. Remember this? We're watching on national news. We've got national cameras watching the recount. And they've got these old punch cards where people had pushed in buttons who they were voting for. And so when they sent those to the readers, some of them didn't get counted right. And it's down to like the hundreds. These things, they started talking about these hanging chads. And here we are watching on national news. Who's going to win this thing? Now, the governor of Florida was Jeb Bush, George Bush's brother. And at one point, finally, the Electoral Commissioner for Dade County declares the election for George Bush. Now, Gore's people are saying, no, that's not right. They haven't counted it properly. They've given too many votes they haven't counted enough of these votes that should have gone for Gore. Gore should have won. So it goes to the Supreme Court in January 2000. We still don't know who the President of the United States is. And the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, voting on party lines, awards the votes of Florida upholds that Florida's votes go to George Bush, and George Bush is elected president. And Democrats are very angry. They feel like the election's been stolen from them. It was a very, very close election. Now, George Bush comes to office with some real problems on his hands. The biggest problem is the Middle East is still greatly problematic for him. This is Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda has been growing up. They were the group I told you about the other day under Osama bin Laden. They want to overthrow the Saudi Arabian government, the House of Saud. They have a populist thing. There's a populism and religion mixed together. Fundamentalist Muslims he wants to get rid of the House of Saud. He says they're a bunch of pawns of the West. They spend all their money in lavishing themselves with harems and Learjets and Porsches and $20,000 hotels, and House of Saud is just wasting all this money that could go to the average people of Saudi Arabia, and they're not very religious. So, and they work too closely with America, and they don't help out Israel, the Palestinians against Israel. And so Al-Qaeda is going to be against all those things. Now, they bombed our barracks in Saudi Arabia, and then they bomb U.S. Embassy in Nairobi, Kenya, during Clinton's administration. And then they bombed the USS Cole in Yemen, tweaking it up with us, right? We know we've got to deal with them, but they're hiding out. They're hiding out in Afghanistan. That's where they're operating from. The Taliban have given them safe refuge. We've also got a problem with Saddam Hussein. Here's what I want you to know about Saddam Hussein. We left him in power, right? Because he was going to be the bulwark between Iran, radical Iran, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. We needed a power person there. But leaving him in power was problematic. He said that he would give up his weapons of mass destruction to us. Here's the thing. Turns out he didn't have them. But we think he's got them, and he won't let our investigators go in. He's being defiant. Plus, we do know this. He is helping the Palestinian uprising. He is providing, they're making bomber vests in Iraq, these suicide bomber vests that people can go and get on a bus and not tell as much they've got munitions on them. He's also giving $20,000 to families who end up having a suicide bomber who they lose. So he is fanning the flames of the Palestinian uprising. That's problematic for us. And he continues to be a source. Now, when President Bush comes into power, he's got Dick Cheney as his vice president, and they put Ronald Rumsfeld in as defense Secretary of War or Secretary of Defense. And they come in with the realization that they've got to deal with Saddam Hussein. And from all the accounts I've read, they plan to go to war with him and remove him from office. They just had to figure out how to do it. They've also got to deal with Al-Qaeda. Now, I do have another idea I need to give to you guys, and that is the Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto is in Japan. In 2001, I think it was March, the world was meeting in Kyoto to talk about climate change policies. Beginning in the early 1990s, scientists were watching with alarm the rising temperature of waters in the North Atlantic, and they attributed it to global warming as a result of greenhouse gases, methane and carbon being released into the atmosphere, not allowing for enough radiation to get back into space after it comes from the sun, trapping and warming, which will result, the climate change scientists said, in the melting of the polar caps eventually, the rising sea tides, crazy weather, and therefore the world needs to slow down radically emissions from fossil fuels especially. George Bush, this Kyoto was already arranged. We were going to go to it. That was arranged under Bill Clinton. But George Bush pulls us out of it. And he says he doesn't believe in climate change, science, and he doesn't care what the rest of the world does. The United States is not going to participate. Now, Democrats here in the United States get mad at him and say, you're just big oil, you're a big fossil fuel guy, and you are feeding the interests of your constituents, which are wealthy fuel people. He says and here's the beginning of what historians and people at the time will begin to call cowboy diplomacy. The cowboy is this independent person who just doesn't care what anybody else says. He's going to do what he thinks is right. Kind of like Ronald Reagan. All right, now, that was March, 2 months after he became president. In September, in his 8th month of his presidency, his contested presidency, Al-Qaeda pulls off its amazing mission. It puts 2 airliners into the Twin Towers in New York City. They'd already tried to bomb it once, about 10 years before, by truck bombs in the basement of the World Trade Center, but it hadn't affected the buildings. But putting 2 airliners in it brings both these down. George Bush goes down to ground zero. He's working with the firefighters and such. We lose about 4,000 people there. And we know it's Al-Qaeda. His popularity, by the way, goes up dramatically here. And he tells the Taliban in Afghanistan, we're coming to Afghanistan to get Al-Qaeda, and you'd better get out of our way. The Taliban say, no, you can't come in. We're a sovereign nation. George Bush says, I hope you were going to say that. No problem. We're coming anyway. And so we start a war on Afghanistan. It's called the Global War on Terror. This is Dick Cheney, probably the most powerful vice president in American history. Ronald Rumsfeld, the defense minister. Press really likes Rumsfeld quite a bit at first. We quickly go into Afghanistan. We get a United Nations resolution for it. NATO joins us. Our European allies join us. No problem. They totally get it. Go for it. But then we pivot, and that plan of having to deal with Iraq and the defiant Saddam Hussein begins to play out too. It appears that we might have thought that the general anger over al-Qaeda, and a lot of Americans thinking that maybe Saddam Hussein, since he was backing the Palestinian uprising and hating America, maybe he's also in cahoots with al-Qaeda. In fact, Saddam Hussein came out and said he was so happy when he saw the 9/11 events that he's called it the mission, whatever he called it. He was just so happy. He was overjoyed. And that joy alone almost made him look culpable, right? It's not very hard for Americans to say, we now want to go to Saddam Hussein. And we give him a final ultimatum that he's going to have to allow American troops to come in, I believe is what we asked for, and he says no. So we go back to United Nations, and this is your ID WMD and Colin Powell. And this right here is considered to be the biggest stain on the Bush administration and on the United States during this period. Colin Powell, our Secretary of State, who previously had been Joint Chief of Staff, head of the military under George Bush Sr., he has to go to the League of the United Nations and present material for a resolution authorizing the use of force against Iraq. He presents the evidence we had, and the international community doesn't buy it. They don't think that we've got enough evidence to show that Saddam Hussein actually has these weapons of mass destruction and that he is in breach of the treaty he signed in 1991, and therefore the United Nations does not authorize an attack on Iraq. And so then George Bush says he's going to form a coalition of the willing. The coalition of the willing is, okay, you countries that are with us, come with us. We're going in. Germany and France and Russia, they all say, no, we're not joining you. This is about America flexing its muscle too much in the Middle East. It's going to lead to the United States' permanent occupation of Iraq and of the oil that it wants. A lot of those countries are angry at George Bush for the Kyoto Protocol and his cowboy diplomacy, and they think it's a land grab, basically on the part of the United States. Britain goes with us. Eastern European countries that are afraid of Russia go with us, like Poland. They're like, we're with you, right? Because they want to make sure that we're on their side later on if they have to fight Russia. And so we go in alone in 2003. We've already pretty much overthrown the Taliban in Afghanistan, and now we do this final operation in which we go after Saddam Hussein. He flees Baghdad, hides in a hole. We find him and turn him over to the new government that we put in power in Iraq, and they execute him. About 2005, Saddam Hussein is executed by hanging. Now, we end up, why does Iraq become so bad? Well, the problem is this. We end up taking out Saddam Hussein came from the western part of Iraq, which was Sunni. And our ambassador that we sent into Iraq decided to go with an anti-Ba'ath movement. The Ba'ath Party was it was declared illegal. Well, the Ba'ath Party was primarily Sunni Muslims from Iraq. And so they feared that power would shift to the Kurds in the north, and most especially the Shia in the southeast, the Shia down here. And so the Sunnis over in Fallujah, and Fallujah, is that how you say it? And other western parts of Iraq, they started an insurgency against the United States. They started to fight back at us. And we end up getting bled horribly during this war. And we end up not being able to get a political solution that we hope to get with Iraq. And so the people that write the history of this period of time look at, there was mistakes made in our calculations, our political calculations in 2003. We should have recognized that the Sunni felt displaced. And if the United States didn't work with them, we were going to make a whole big group of enemies, which we did. And our forces were being hit hard until we did a new surge, which was when we pushed back. This is under the advice of Senator John McCain from Arizona. It was the architect, really, of getting Republicans to side with the new president who's going to be coming here, Obama. And we do work with a Sunni now, and we put together kind of a government that's under a Shia prime minister, but the Sunni, we got them on board too. But right now, I think you guys know Iraq's a mess, right? And it's not solved, and it's a problem. What does all this lead to? It leads to our lack of credibility with European allies who don't like George Bush, a crack in the Western alliance that had been looking so good in the 1990s with the collapse of the Soviet Union. We're getting better now in the world as far as our world relations go, but our global war on terror, we've had 50,000 casualties in this, American casualties in the war. We'd probably have a lot more deaths, except that we're a lot better with our medical abilities, and we've got a lot of body armor, but we've got lots and lots of veterans who've lost arms and legs. We had 6,000 killed outright. Iraq and Afghanistan, I've seen numbers from 180 up to 1 million dying in these two wars as a result of the wars. Probably 180,000 resulting from U.S. military activity. Costs us over $1.2 trillion, which is not part of our national debt. We've not been paying for it. It's part of our national debt, but we're not been paying for it. It's off the budget. It gave us some ongoing problems of what do we do with foreign fighters that we captured abroad that were part of Al-Qaeda. We brought them to our little outpost in Cuba that we've held on to called Guantanamo Bay. And President Obama, when he was running for office in 2000, he said he was going to close this thing, but he hasn't managed to close it. So there's that. That handles our IDs of WMD. And I guess the only one left that I have for you is TARP. In 2008, the bubble that had been growing since 1999 burst in America. The bubble was inflated value of real estate. Real estate values around America. You could have bought a condominium in Myrtle Beach. In fact, my parents knew people like this. They bought a condo for about $200,000. By the mid-2000s, it was worth $1 million. It had gone up 5 times in value. Now, banks are writing loans for that. And what's happening is that we're pretty much awash in money during this period of time, and banks are writing easy credit. It hardly takes anything to get qualified. And they're writing credit on overly priced real estate. And they're simply using, I think I told you a little bit about this the other day, you have to get an evaluation done, an estimate. And they base it on what other ones were building and being sold for. And so that just goes up and up and up. Now the banks start doing these financial instruments called mortgage-backed securities. So they were using their assets were all these mortgages. They were then putting out to the public and other institutions, and it turns out those mortgages were underwater. They weren't worth what they said they were worth. And in 2008 September, as the next election's coming up, the United States bubble collapses, and the value of all these banks start plummeting based on the real estate bubble now starts imploding. And on Wall Street, we have the collapse of the U.S. stock market. Millions of middle-class people who had IRAs and other investments lose their wealth. Some major banks in Wall Street go into the tank, and the United States has to step in and save those banks. That's what TARP stands for. Troubled Asset Relief Program. All these banks have got all these loans that aren't worth very much, and banks are supposed to have so much collateral in them, and their collateral is not worth what they're saying it is. So the government's going to give $500 billion under George Bush to bail this out. This is George Bush addressing the nation, trying to explain why the Senate needs to rapidly pass this legislation he's asking for.
The market is not functioning properly. There has been a widespread loss of confidence, and major sectors of America's financial system are at risk of shutting down. The government's top economic experts warn that without immediate action by Congress, America could slip into a financial panic, and a distressing scenario would unfold. More banks could fail, including some in your community. The stock market would drop even more, which would reduce the value of your retirement account. The value of your home could plummet. Foreclosures would rise dramatically. And if you own a business or a farm, you would find it harder and more expensive to get credit. more businesses would close their doors, and millions of Americans could lose their jobs. Even if you have good credit history, it would be more difficult for you to get the loans you need to buy a car or send your children to college. And ultimately, our country could experience a long and painful recession. I know that an economic rescue package will present a tough vote for many members of Congress. It is difficult to pass a bill that commits so much of the taxpayers' hard-earned money. I also understand the frustration of responsible Americans who pay their mortgages on time, file their tax returns every April 15th, and are reluctant to pay the cost of excesses on Wall Street. But given the situation we are facing, not passing a bill now would cost these Americans much more later.
We are in dire situation, and we're in a dire situation because of that bubble. The financial shenanigans done on Wall Street that created so much wealth, including, well, the biggest one is the Financial Modernization Act, the Gramm-Leach-Lively, which got rid of Glass-Steagall, deregulating the big banks and letting them do whatever they want. They had all these financial instruments that would make a huge amount of money. Companies like AIG, insurance for insurance, it collapses. All right, now we have Barack Obama running for president against Hillary Clinton. The Democrats are coming back. The argument is that most of the people that made wealth from the 1990s to 2008 had gone primarily to the wealthiest. By the way, I do need to mention one more thing about George Bush. George Bush, during his administration, he passes something called Medicare Plan B, which is he pays for the pharmaceuticals of most seniors, which is going to come out to be a lot of money. He's going to commit us to that. That may have been him trying to get a little bit of cover, but George Bush has also dropped taxes, and the deficit when we were making money in the 2000s ends up going up anyway. And I'll talk about that in a minute. One of the problems of deficit spending. Barack Obama beats Hillary Clinton in a very contested Democratic primary, and he's up against John McCain, who I mentioned earlier, who has picked Sarah Palin as his running mate. Sarah Palin reviving the old American exceptionalism idea. And then he is inaugurated, and I love this picture that somebody made up. It's George Bush at the inauguration, you know, one president handing off power to the other one, hugging each other. And he's like, kick me. Why did somebody put the word kick me on the back of it? Because he's about to have to deal with this economic depression. I mean, it's collapsing. Government revenue is going to go through the floor. You've got $1 trillion war to pay for, and you're about to have unemployment go through the roof. Is that going to work? He didn't think there was any way he'd get reelected. But at any rate, 6 million jobs are lost in America by mid-2009. And Barack Obama makes a decision. Europe decides to go with austerity. Austerity means if your revenue to the government is dropping, then you cut your spending. But for the United States, we decided to go with Keynesian full employment theory, which means that if there's a downturn, the government tries to do stimulus spending like we did under the New Deal. The other thing is we've got 6 million unemployed, and guess what we do with them? We're going to give them unemployment payments. Now, we'd had money set aside for this, but it's not nearly enough money for these 6 million people. And we're spending $150 billion every 6 months on this kind of, to try to take care of all these families that have lost their job. He also does this American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Now here's the downside of it. Barack Obama and Congress is going to pass budget deficits like we haven't seen since, well, for a very long time. The other thing, now he does try to do a reform for Wall Street. The Dodd-Bailey Banking Act is trying to do this. They're trying to look at what happened in the build-up in 2000s. I guess I should have these things on as an ID, like Affordable Health Care Act. That's the most problematic one. But it leads to a backlash in America between two things. A lot of Americans still don't like the idea of government involved in health care, even though health care costs are huge. They're making fun of the idea of HOPE, the administration. They're saying nope, and no Obamacare. He does manage to get reelected in a very close contest in 2012. He does, in his first administration, manage to get Osama bin Laden is discovered and taken out during his administration. These are the federal deficits. Under Bill Clinton, the first number here on the left is the revenue, how much revenue the government was getting per year. And that's the deficit. That's how much money the government spent over what they got in. If you can see what happens is, first there's some more years. There's 92, 93, 94, 95 I didn't put in there. But 96, he's had a deficit. Deficit gets really small in 97. And then right through here, we've got a surplus, a budget surplus. Now, that's because our economy was doing really well. What you're supposed to do when your economy is doing well is pay off your debt, right? Because you went into debt to try to promote economic growth. But what ends up happening is we just spend it all. We do two things. We spend money on projects and we cut taxes. So by the second administration of Bush, and this is not including the war because they're not paying for the war here, our deficit goes up during all these years that we've actually got economic strength. But we're not paying off, we've cut taxes so much and we're still building programs, so that's all rather expensive. But look what happens under President Obama. There is a $400 billion, by the way, this number is trillion. There's a $400 billion loss in revenue when we have the collapse, but he goes with stimulus spending. And this number goes from $12 trillion of total national debt when he was in office. When he came into office, there was $12 trillion by the time we get to Bush. And by the time right now, it's at almost 17 trillion. So it's gone from like 11 to 17 in 8 years. And that gives birth to the Tea Party movement in America and the idea that how in the world are we ever going to pay off all this money? The budget deficit is no longer that high. I don't have the numbers up there for you, but it's finally turning around. But we still have got a lot of unemployed people. We've gotten through it. We are winding down our wars. We've left Iraq. Iraq, however, is very problematic. We are trying to get out of Afghanistan. The international alliance is doing a lot better. Our European counterparts, we're in a better relationship with them now. That seems to be solved in part because of the rise of Russia and Vladimir Putin and the problems of China, right? Because China is now beginning to build up a large military and challenge us for power in Asia. So I leave you with your 2 semesters of history thinking that you're prepared to keep up with things as you go along and maybe know what's going on in the world.